Okay, welcome back. Now we're going to go ahead and start getting our hands dirty with Mental Ray. So the first thing we're going to do is, since we already loaded up our project directory, which you should have done a couple of videos back, what we're going to do is open up our first example scene that comes with this tutorial. So let's go ahead and go up to File, Open, and a shortcut, you can see it right there, it's Control-O. Now we're prompted to open up the scene. Go ahead and go to Scene 01. So 01 scene, primitives, start. Let's go ahead and load that scene up, and you should get this right here. It's a very simple scene, nothing special, nothing out of this world. It's simply a flat surface that imitates a floor or a desk or whatever you want it to imitate, with some very primitive objects on top, things like cylinders and spheres, cubes, cones, and so on. And then this weird little guy over here. Okay, so first of all, when you want to go ahead and use Mental Ray, you have to do a process called rendering. Now before you start doing your final renders and all that, you have to do previews. You have to test things out and see what they're coming along, what they're looking like, right? So how do we do that? Well, in XSI, with Mental Ray in XSI, we have two ways that we can preview and test our renders out. So let's go over the first way. Now the first way is the one with the most options, the one with the most ins and outs. So you might want to sit up and pay attention for this part, because we're going to talk about a lot of things here. And we're going to talk about the render region tool. That's the first way that you can preview things, using the render region tool. Okay, so where is this render region tool? How do we find it? Well, there's two ways to access the render region tool and use it. I'm going to show you the first way, which is the long way, and then I'm going to show you the quick shortcut way, which is bam, real fast. Okay, so here's the long way. Over here in the render main toolbar, under the render section, you'll see this top button that says regions. You'll notice there's a little black triangle icon, and in case you haven't realized this yet, all the buttons in the exercise interface that have this little black triangle always means that there's a submenu when you hit that button. So let's hit that, and you'll see that there is a submenu. You can see display has a little triangle, so that has a submenu, and so on and so forth. Now when we open up this submenu for the region tool, we'll see that there's a whole bunch of different options. Let's not worry about any of these. Let's just worry about the top option here, the region tool option, and it has the letter Q. That's because, let's go ahead and click this, the letter Q is the shortcut key to use this tool. So remember I said there was a quick way of doing it? Well, that's the quick way, using the Q button on your keyboard. So I did it the long way. Now you notice that your mouse cursor actually changed, the icon changed. Now you should see this little, kind of a strange little square down there with a little black sphere in the middle. Now if you left click with your mouse and you drag, you'll create a render region window. So you can kind of just interactively draw out this rectangle here. And when you let go of the mouse button, Mental Ray automatically renders, and you should have something like this. Congratulations, you just did your first render with Mental Ray. Unfortunately, it looks like utter garbage. Now don't worry, that's perfectly normal. That's because by default, every scene in XSI is going to render this nasty when you first start a brand new scene up. We're going to have something called aliasing here, which is this nasty artifact in here on the edges of our little gray table here, and on the edges basically of all of our objects. You'll see that there's these jagged edges. That's called aliasing, and it's not good. Now, why is it aliasing? That's because our quality settings are very low right now. Why is that? Because when you have quality settings really low, it lets the renderer render out as fast as possible. Lightning fast. And you saw that when we drew this out, it rendered almost instantly. And this will depend a lot on your computer system, and I'll talk about later on in this tutorial what determines rendering speed. In case you want to go out and upgrade your hardware, I'll tell you exactly what you should upgrade to expect a boost in performance with Mental Ray. But for now, let's talk about the render region tool. Alright, so how does this work? Well, you'll notice first of all there's this yellow border line that shows the areas. Anything that's inside the yellow border is going to render out. Anything outside of it doesn't get rendered. It's pretty much that simple. Now if we hover our mouse cursor over the yellow area, you notice the mouse cursor changes into 4 directional arrows that point in all directions. If you left click and drag, you can move this render region window to a new location. Pretty nifty, huh? Well, It gets even niftier. We have these blue handles at every corner and on every side of the render region window. And when you hover your mouse over it, you should see your cursor changes to show you what that little blue handle does. These blue handles are resizing handles, and you can use them to click and drag them with the left mouse button and resize your window however you want. So you can see how I can make it larger, I can stretch it out, I can make them thin, I can make it very flat, I can make it tall, I can make it small, I can do whatever I want to it. Alright, so you probably noticed that there's this other little blue handle over here on the right that looks a little bit different than the other ones. It's a little bit taller than the other ones, a little bit stretched out, a little bit bigger. That one doesn't actually affect the size of the render region. Instead, it affects the quality. If you go ahead and hover your mouse over it, you'll see it change from a blue square, blue rectangle actually, to this little slider. And the way this works is pretty simple. The higher the slider is set to, the better the quality. We can see when I put it all the way to the highest setting up here, the quality in the render region improved dramatically. We don't see much of that artifact if at all right now, and everything got smoothed out and it's looking pretty good. Now if we lower the slider all the way down, our quality is going to be at the worst. But if you noticed, it rendered much faster, almost instantly. If you put it around the middle, you get a pretty decent balance of the two. Some better quality, not the best, but you get pretty fast render speed. So it's a trade-off that you have to accept. If you want high quality, you lose speed. If you want speed, you lose quality. So keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and keep it right in the middle so I get a good balance of the two. Now let's go ahead and talk about some other aspects of this render region. One thing that's really important about the render region tool is automatic refresh. By default, this little tool here, the render region tool, is set up to refresh automatically by itself every time you make a change to the scene. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit the space bar on the keyboard to go to object mode, and you'll see that my mouse cursor changed and object is pressed in right here on the MCP. I'm going to go ahead and click on the cone, and yes, you can click and interact with objects that are behind the render region tool here. So I clicked on the cone, and I know it's selected because in the name field up here of my selection box it says cone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit V for Victor on the keyboard to switch to the translate tool, which you can do the long way by going over here to the transform panel and hitting T. And now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go ahead with the middle mouse button, click, and then I'm going to push over to the left or to the right, wherever I want, and I'm just going to move it over to the left a little bit. Now watch the render region when I let go of the mouse button. See how it updated? And now it rendered it in a new position, so I can move it back over here and it'll render out back right there, and vice versa. Well, the render region tool right now is set up to an auto refresh mode, which means that it's going to automatically refresh every time I move an object or make changes to the scene, such as the color of objects, the intensity of lights, all kinds of different things. Now, if you don't want that kind of behavior, you can actually shut that off by opening up the render region options. Now, there's actually a few ways that we can do this. Let me show you the first way. We can go over here to regions. We can click there. Remember this menu item that we were using before? Well, you'll see an auto refresh flag here, and it's checked on. If we go ahead and check it off, it'll turn auto refresh completely off. And you notice that XSI tells us that this is the case because the yellow border turned into a red border around the render region tool. This tells us that we're now in manual refresh mode. This means that if I take this cone and I move it, notice how the render region doesn't update. That's because now I'm in control and I can update it whenever I want. To go ahead and manually update it, we can go here to regions and hit refresh, but we can see we got a shortcut key, which is F5. So let's use the shortcut key instead in order to save time and be more productive. So let's go ahead and hit F5, and you'll see it manually update into the new position. This is a very important part of the render region tool because it puts you in control of how you want to go ahead and refresh this. So remember, the shortcut key is F5 to go ahead and manually refresh this. And let's go ahead and look at some more options. If we go over here and click on this little black arrow icon up here, we'll see that we get a sub-menu. Now this sub-menu is the same exact one that's over here in the regions tool. So it's just another way of accessing it. Let's go ahead and open up that sub-menu, and we get our refresh button, our auto refresh toggle on and off. We can also use a few other buttons here. We can also set up the display if we want to display just the alpha channel, the red channel, green, whatever. And we can also go to render channel and choose which render channel we want to use, but we're not going to get into render channels yet, so don't worry about that. And then we have the actual options for the render region tool. So if you thought these were the options, well, they were, but these are the actual options for the renderer. So let's go ahead and click on that and see what happens. Whoa, we get ourselves what's known in the XSI terminology as a PPG. This is a property page window that allows us to change the parameters and properties of whatever it is that we're trying to change. In this case, the render region tool's renderer options. So we get two subsets of options here. And I can prove that to you by collapsing both of them. Now I know you didn't see where I clicked because there was so many options on the screen, so don't worry about it. We have two tabs up here, the render region options and the mental ray render options. So what's the difference between the two? Well, let me go ahead and expand the render region options by clicking right there on the subject line. And we don't have that many options here, but we got a few. For example, we can choose to use the current pass options, which we're not going to get into right now. We can also choose which renderer we want to use. We can use mental ray, we can use the hardware renderer, which is a different renderer, or we can use our scene options. We're not going to get into that right now, so don't worry about it. Don't get confused by it. Now let's go ahead and expand the actual mental ray render options right here. And now we can see we get another subset of options, and these are all of the mental ray options that we can tweak and change in order to change the way that this renders out in terms of quality or different lighting algorithms, optimization algorithms, and things like that. Now we're not going to get too far into that right now because it's going to be going a little bit over your head at the moment. So we're trying to let this soak in one step at a time. So don't worry, we're going to be getting there. Let's close this PPG. I just wanted to show you what that options was just to demystify it a little bit. Alright, next thing I want to talk about is region comparisons and saving render regions. Here's a very neat thing about the render region tool in XSI 6. If you notice, we have these four kind of little icon slots up here in this gray bar. What this allows us to do is save out versions of render regions. Okay, so you're probably thinking, i3D Jack, you're crazy. What are you talking about? You're not making any sense. Well, it's going to make sense now when I show you how this works. So let's go ahead and do that. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and right click and we'll hit store comparison image when this little submenu pops up. And you'll see that it says MMB here on the side. That's an acronym for middle mouse button. So what it's telling you is that you can use the middle mouse button from now on to do that instead of opening up the menu, which is pretty nice because it saves us a little bit of time. So now what I did was I saved this render region out temporarily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, with the clone selected, and I still have it selected, if you don't, just go ahead and click on it and make sure it's selected because it shows up here in the name field. Go over here under modify and click on shader, and you get a PPG that controls the shader of that cone. Now right now, every object in the scene has this same shader applied to it, which is the default scene material, which is always gray by default when you open up a new scene in XSI. So when I change this color here in this color box to say green, it'll update in my scene. Now everything turned green, not just the cone, and again that's because everything in the scene is sharing the same exact shader. Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and save another one here by going to this empty slot, and it's empty because it's gray, and using the middle mouse button to click, and now it'll turn white. I now saved this current state here where it's green. What I can do is go ahead and click on this one over here, the first one that I saved on gray, and you'll see it's still green. So what's going on? Is it broken? No, it's not. If you go over here to the side, you'll see this small little tick mark. It's kind of hard to see. It's kind of like a very pale pink over here. And you see your icon change to this cursor. You can see it on my screen, the two arrows. And if you go ahead and left click and drag that out, what you can do is use kind of this window mode to go ahead and show you the before, the after. The first comparison image, the latest comparison image, or the current image. Isn't that pretty neat? That's pretty nifty. We can go ahead and compare different images of each other. So if I place this right here in the middle, I can land this smack in the middle and see a comparison of gray and green before and after. Pretty neat. And we can save up to 2 more for a maximum of 4 comparison renders, which lets us directly compare in the region tool our different renders here and see what we like. So if we like the gray, we'll go ahead and revert back to the gray. If we like the green, we'll stick with the green. Now let's say you like the gray. Now you could go back and change the shader by going to modify shader and trying to go back to the gray that you had before, right? Right, that's not wrong. You could do that. But there's actually another neat little trick here that we can use. If we go over here to the first tick mark, which was the white one that we created, let's go ahead and right click and you'll see different buttons here. Now we can hit clear comparison image to delete that first one and get rid of it. We can also set current comparison image, which will overwrite the one that's already there, which will essentially make it green since that's the current one. We can store, which is not what we're trying to do. And then we have this little lone option down here that says revert scene to here. Well, if we click on that, what happens is XSI reverts to it. It kind of works like the Windows restore points that saves the state of your computer so you can revert back to it in case something goes wrong. Well, in this case, if the change you made is so nasty or you just don't like it, you can always revert back to the other state, one of the other 4 states that are recorded here on this top little gray bar. So that's actually a very good thing to do. Now one thing you want to keep in mind is it'll only revert back certain changes. So changes like the color of lights, the intensity of lights, the color of shaders, simple things, soft changes like that will be reverted to. Now what I can do is simply go ahead and right click, hit clear comparison image to delete that, clear comparison image to delete that one as well. If you want to get rid of your render region right here that we drew out, just hit this little black X right there and it'll get rid of it for you. If you want to bring out the same render region without drawing a new one, what you can do is hit the Q button to go ahead and switch over to the render region tool mode, which is the shortcut, remember, and go ahead and hit the middle mouse button and that'll bring the render region tool back up. So you can do the same thing, hit the Q button to go ahead and switch to render region mode, middle mouse button to hide it, bring it out, hide it, bring it out. So that's another neat little shortcut to remember right there. Okay, that covers everything that I wanted to cover about the render region tool. Now what we have to look at is the second way of previewing renders in XSI. Now if you remember at the beginning of this video, I talked about that there were 2 ways to preview render. Well, the render region tool was the first way, and like I said, was I right or was I wrong? It's a pretty big tool and has a lot of options to it, so it takes a while to discuss it. Now if we go over here on the render in the main render toolbar, you'll see down here there's a button called preview and there's no little black icon. So there's no sub options to this. It's just you click on it and XSI will go ahead and render this out with mental ray. And we get a pretty big image. So it's pretty simple. All you do is click on it and you get this bigger preview here. And we have a few options here. We can save this image out, so we can hit save picture. You can save it out, send it to your creative director or whoever your boss is, and he'll probably say that thing looks disgusting, do it over. Or probably not, depends on how much of a nice guy he is. Now we have this other button here which locks it down. Let's go ahead and unlock it, and once we do that, it'll actually automatically refresh. And we'll talk about how important that locking feature is in a moment. Then you have this little button here, which is the actual refresh button, that if you click on it, will automatically tell XSI to go ahead and refresh that with mental ray. Then we have our little options box here. So if we go ahead and look at this, we have quite a few different options here to choose from. The current option is shown because it's got a little black dot next to it. That's the current pass render options. Then we have 4 others, viewport A, B, C, and D region options. And then we have an auto fit viewer, which is checked on by default. So what do all these different things mean? Well, the current pass render options are the final render options. That's where you go ahead and set up, usually go ahead and set up the final render options. That's where you set it up to the highest quality, you use all the nifty features of mental ray, and you're ready to do one of those long renders that takes hours to do. Depending on what you're doing and how you're using mental ray, it could take hours, it could take minutes, really depends on what you're doing. And then you have these four options here, A, B, C, and D. These stand for the different render region tools. So in order for you to understand that better, let me go ahead and show you by simply closing this window out. And what I'm going to do is hit F12 on the keyboard while hovering over that window, and this will bring me back to my default 4-window viewport configuration. If you look at these different viewports, they're all different because they all have this different letter up here in the upper left of the corresponding viewport. So this viewport up here in the top left has the letter A. This one, the one we were working in, the 3D viewport, or camera viewport, has the letter B. Then we have C and D down here. Each viewport has its own identifier, A, B, C, and D. Now when we went to preview, you saw that under options we had A, B, C, and D. Well, by now everything should start to click in your mind, and you should start to realize, so every viewport has its own render region options. Well, if that's what you guessed, you're right. If we go ahead and draw a render region here, we can draw a render region here, we can draw a render region here, and we can draw a render region here. Each viewport essentially can have its own render region with its own independent options. What do I mean by that? Well, you can set the quality for this render region all the way down. You can set the quality for this render region all the way up. And this one's set to manual refresh, so I'll go ahead and refresh it manually. There you go. And you notice that each render region has its own options. I could set this one to manual refresh, this one to auto, I could set this one to low quality, I could set this one to high quality. I could do essentially whatever I want with these render regions. So this allows us to go ahead and change the options for the render region tool independently of each viewport. Now the guideline is that you're limited to one render region per viewport. So we have 4 viewports, so we can have a maximum of 4 render regions, 1 per viewport. So that's the little restriction that you gotta abide by. Alright, so I'm gonna go ahead and cancel out all these render regions, and you can do that easily by hitting the X. I like to use the shortcut which is the render region tool, Q, and then hitting the the left mouse button to go ahead and cancel those out. So let me go ahead and I'm going to hit F12 on this viewport to maximize it, and I'm going to cancel that render region out. I'm going to go back to the preview window. So each one of these options corresponds to their current render region. For example, if I'm working with viewport B, which I am, I'm going to switch over to viewport B region options so that I can see this rendered out using the render options and the quality settings that I was using for the render region in that viewport. Which, if you remember, I turned the quality all the way up, which is why this is looking actually pretty nice and smooth. What if we wanted to do comparison renders using the render preview as opposed to the render region tool? We can actually do that. Let me go ahead and double click here on the blue name bar of this window to go ahead and temporarily collapse it out of the way, tuck it out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and pick the cone. I'm going to go to shader. I'm going to go to the color, and I'm going to pick red. Close that, go back to our render, and you see it updates in red. Okay, I got a problem here. I want to compare the gray with the red because I still haven't made up my mind as to which color I want to use, because I'm real troublesome that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit undo a few times until this turns gray again, which it did right now. I'm going to go ahead and let this render out again. And there we go, rendering, done. I'm going to lock it down this time. So I'm going to hit that little lock button up there. It shows a little icon of a padlock to lock it down with the gray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and change the color on this back to red again. So I'm going to go to modify shader, pick the color box, put red, close, and there we go. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up another render preview, but I'm going to run into a problem. If I hit preview, nothing happens because this is locked down. But if you notice, it didn't open a new preview window. That could be a problem, right? Wrong. Let's go ahead and go up here to View, Rendering/Texturing, and we're going to go over here to Render Preview. This allows us to open up a second preview window, and we can actually open up more and more of these preview windows. Usually you're not going to want to work with more than about 2. Maybe you'll want to work with 3 or maybe even 4 sometimes. So if that tickles your fancy, hey, go ahead and do it. So now I have two render previews, and I could collapse one and look at the gray, expand the red one again, double click to collapse it, and I could just go ahead and compare and contrast. Gray, red, gray, red. Now, this isn't like the render region tool allows you to revert back to the gray. So to revert back to the gray, well, the only way is to hit the undo button or to remember what the shader settings were and go ahead and set them. Now, I know what the shader settings were. I believe they were probably 0.7, 0.7, and 0.7. Although I could be wrong, I don't know. Really doesn't make a difference. Okay. Alright, now that we saw how to use two different preview tools in XSite, the preview using Mental Ray, the next thing we're going to do is talk about some of our overall render options. Now, I'm not going to get into that right now. We're going to end this segment here and we're going to start the next one hitting the ground running and talking about those different options. Now, there's a lot of stuff we got to talk about in the next video, so you might want to take a little coffee break here or something and collect your thoughts, let this stuff soak in, and we'll get started in the next video.